Today we're going to learn Shabbat Kuf Mem Aleph. We're going to start at the Mishnah. Hakash sha'al gabe hamita. If you have straw on your bed, lo yina'anenu biyado, ela mina'ano begufo. We have an issue that straw is muktzah, what we call muktzah machmat gufo. It has no purpose. It's not a utensil even. So you can't move it with your hands. What can you do though? What they would do is they would lie on straw. If you want to spread it around, so mina'ano begufo. You can use your body to move it. You can lie down on it and move it around with your body. Now, what's the issue here? This is what we call tiltul min hatzad. Right? You're doing it indirectly. The problem is that indirectly is usually a problem when it comes to muktzah machmat gufo. If you remember the different categories, if something is muktzah in and of itself, like a rock, even with your body, you can't move it. So the question is, how do we allow this? So some people distinguish and they say there's a difference. There's two different kinds of tiltul min hatzad. One is using your body to move something, and one is using your hand to move something. This is using your body. It's so indirect that it's okay. If you use your hand to push something, which pushes something else, which moves the muktzah, that already is indirect with your hand. That will be a problem if it's muktzah machmat gufo. But if it's with your body, like in this case, it's not a problem. But if the straw, straw has different purposes. It could be used for burning, which would make it muktzah because it doesn't have a purpose. It could also be used for animals to eat. So if it's your animal food and you set it aside before Shabbat as such, shayalav karo sadin, or another way we use it is if there was a pillow on top of it or a sheet, meaning you already set it up in your bed to be used for you to lie on, then minano biyado. Then you can actually move the straw because that straw is not muktzah machmat gufo because it's serving a purpose. Machbesh shabale batim. This seems to be some sort of ironing tool that they would use. It was two boards that they would press together and the clothing would go inside, and it was sometimes there were nails or things that kept it together. That's going to be part of our problem here. If it's shabale batim mitirim, you're allowed to open it and take out the clothes inside it if you want to wear them. Avalo kovshin, but you can't actually press them, okay, because it's either you're doing it, it's a tircha, or because it's binyan, we're worried you're actually building when you do it. So there's different issues as to what this issue is, but lo kovshim, v'shel kovsim lo yigabo. If it's of the people, the launderers, meaning it's their professional one, then you can't touch it. Some people say you can't touch it because it's muktzah. This, by the way, shows that maybe there is an issue of touching by muktzah, even though most people think it's not an issue to touch, it's only a problem to move, but maybe don't touch it because you might move it. So if it's, meaning before we said you can't use it for pressing the clothes, but you can actually just open it. With the kovsim, if it's the professional ones, you can't even open it. And there's a few possible reasons, either because you're opening it because theirs are more serious and you might actually come to pegs, put one of the pegs back into place, or because it's what we call muktzah machmat chesron kis, because it's their professional ones that they use, and that's more muktzah. That's a higher level of muktzah, as we discussed in the past. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, im haya mutar me'erev Shabbat, matir et kulo v'shamto. If it was already open from erev Shabbat, then you can open it entirely. In other words, if it's open slightly, this is a little like the opposite of mosif ohel. If it was already somewhat built, you could expand it. Likewise here, once it's already a little bit open, you could open it all the way, and we don't have to worry about it. Am Rav Nachman. Now we're going to start with this issue of tiltul min hatzad. We're going to quote something else and then connect it to our Mishnah. Hi pugla milamala lamata share milamata lamala asir. We've seen this before. It's a radish that's in the ground. It's triangular in shape. If it goes, it's wider at the top, narrower at the bottom. You put it in the ground just to hide it there. You can pull it out because you're not actually moving dirt. But if it's the opposite and it's wider at the bottom and the pointy part is at the top, you can't pull it out because it's going to move the dirt. Now this is a case of what we call tiltul min hatzad. You're moving the dirt, right, indirectly, actually using your hand, if you notice. So Ama Rav Ada bar Abba, Amrei Be'Rav, they said in the house of Rav, Tanina, it says in the Mishnah, de lo ke Rav Nachman. Our Mishnah is not like Rav Nachman because it says, Hakash al gabe amita, lo yina'anenu biyado, aval mina'ano begufo. Right, so what do you see here? You can't move it. You can move it with your body, and there we don't allow tiltul min hatzad. Now you might say one is biyad, one is with your body, and I just made that distinction. But you'd have to say here, it's a little bit different because our case, we're talking about muktzah machmat gufo, something that has no purpose whatsoever. This is actually food. So moving food tiltul min hatzad with your hand would be equivalent to tiltul menatzah with your body on something that's muktzah machmach gufo, right? Something that in and of itself has no purpose. So they basically say, right, the Mishnah must not be like Rav Nachman because it says that you can't move it with your body. But you can move it with your, you can move it with your body, you just can't move it with your hand. And there we allow, right, we don't allow tiltul menatzah. And then they just read the rest of the Mishnah, which isn't relevant. So what do you see from here? Tiltul menatzah, according to our Mishnah, is not tiltul, whereas Rav Nachman must not go like our Mishnah because he thinks it is tiltul. Amar Rav Yehuda, Hani pilpale medak. Okay, now we're moving on. We're having all different types of things that are coming up here. Rav Yehuda says, the pilpel, medak chada chada bekatas desakina shari. If you want to chop it up with the back of a knife, you can do that. Okay, tarte asire. But if you use two, it's a problem. Okay, chopping with two knives is a problem, but the back of one knife is allowed. This is the malacha of tochet, of chopping it up. So if you want to chop up the pepper, we're talking about black pepper, the spice pepper, like a hard peppercorn. So you can do it with the back of a knife. Rava Amar, Kevan de Mishane afilu tuva nami. He says, no, since you're doing it not in the typical manner with the back of a knife, even two of them is fine. Amar Rav Yuda, man desache maya lignib nafshe bereisha v'hadar lisalek. He says, if someone is in the water, he has to dry himself off first. Okay, if you go swimming in the river, okay, you have to say, wait a minute, generally it's traditional not to go swimming. So we've seen this a number of times in Shabbat already, that swimming in a natural body of water was not a problem. Later, the rabbis forbade it for all sorts of reasons, because you might build a raft, because you might squeeze out your hair, even though we did see a sugya the other day that maybe there is no schita by hair. You might come to, if you're wearing clothes, it's kind of like washing the clothing. Now we're going to see that there's another issue, which is when you go in the river, when you come out, you have water on you. And if you don't dry yourself right away, you're going to end up carrying water in public. This is assuming the river was in a public space, which normally it is. So he says, if you're in the water, dry yourself right away and then start walking. Dilma atilatuya arba amot bekarmelit, so that you don't carry 4 amot in a karmelit. So then they say, Ihachi ki kanachi nami, kadache kocho arba amot va'asir. So they say, what do you mean? When you go into the water, then you're pushing water theoretically. When you're in the water, you're constantly pushing water. You don't mean to, but your body is causing the water to move. So that should also be a problem. You're causing it to move 4 amot in a karmelit. So what do they answer? Kocho b'karmelit lo gasru. Remember, karmelit is only asur midrabanan to carry 4 amot. So they weren't going to make a gzeira in the karmelit for if you're indirectly causing that. Right here, your body moves in and that causes the water to be displaced. That's kocho. That's not direct, and therefore it's not a problem. Am Rabbi. Rav Yehuda. Some people say Rav Yehuda said it. Teach al gabe raglo mekancho bekarka ve'em mekancho bekotel. We're going to talk about dirt. If you have dirt on your foot, you can rub it in the dirt in the ground, but not on a wall. Okay. Now the assumption in most of the sugyas, it seems, is talking about dirt that's not dried out. Once it dries out, then there's a separate problem, which is if you start removing it, it's going to break up into little pieces, and that's a toladav tochen of chopping something up. So now we're going to say, what if it's moist? So if it's moist, according to Abai or Rav Yehuda, not clear who said it, you can wipe it into the ground, but you can't wipe it on the wall. Amarava, my time of bekotelo, mishum demechse kebone, habiyang chakla'au. So he says, what's the reason for the kotel? The kotel, because the issue is you're building it into, it's a toladav bone. If you put dirt on a wall, it's like putting cement on a wall. Is that why you say it's asur? He says, but that's binyan chakla'au. That's, nobody does that. That's a chakla'ah is a farmer, right? Normal people don't put dirt on their walls. They use cement. So that's not a normal way of building. Therefore, El Amarava, he says the opposite. You can do it on a wall because that's not a normal way of building, smearing dirt on a wall. But you can't put it on the ground. Why is that? The assumption is, where's the best place to rub your foot on the ground if it's dirty ground? Only if there's a hole in the ground. If it's flat, it's going to be a problem. Well, if you do it where there's a hole in the ground, then you're coming to flatten out the ground, which we've already said many times is a tolada if you're outside, then of choresh, of plowing. Itmar. So we have two opposite opinions here. Is it allowed on the wall, or is it allowed specifically not on the wall, but on the ground? Right. So each one says it's allowed in the other place. Itmar. Now it's said that Marbarid Ravina Amar, Echad Ze v'Echad Ze Asur. Both those ways are forbidden. Rav Papa Amar, Echad Ze v'Echad Ze Mutar. Rav Papa says they're both allowed. This is exactly the sugya we saw yesterday, where we have all four possibilities. Either it's allowed one way and not the other, or the flip, or it's not allowed at all, or it's entirely permitted. So we have all four options. So the one who said it's forbidden, so what do? Right? Let's say you step on dog poop on the street on Shabbat. So what do? How do you get it off? You can't rub it on the ground. You can't rub it on a wall. So he would take a beam and he would take it off with a beam. Again, you can scrape it off, assuming it's moist. Once it's dried out, then we have a separate problem of tochen. But again, that's not what the Gemara is referring to. Amarava, lo leitiv inish apume delichaya, dilma minagdera lechefetz ba'ate latuye. Okay, you shouldn't sit right at the entranceway of the mavoi, where there's a lechi right next to you. Remember, when you have a mavoi, it's an alleyway which has one side open. And if you want to allow carrying with the mavoi to Rashid or a beam, you put up a lechi there. However, when there's a lechi, that's a beam standing up vertically. When the lechi is there, though, if you're standing right in the entranceway where the lechi is, what's the whole idea of the lechi? It's supposed to be so that you notice that there's something there and you remember, oh, I can't take out, this is the boundary. I can't go into Rashid or a beam. But if you're sitting right next to that lechi, you're not going to see any boundary. And therefore, don't sit right next to where the lechi is, because maybe that's maybe something will come your way, like a ball will roll toward you, and you might accidentally carry it out into public domain, or the reverse. You might bring it inside and you just won't notice that lechi there reminding you that I'm sitting in the entranceway. V'amarava. As you see, we're just going from topic to topic. Lo litztid inish kuba, dilma ate lashvuye gumot. You shouldn't secure a barrel with dirt, because you might come to, you shouldn't secure the barrel on the dirt. Okay, if you want to put a barrel and stand it up on the ground, you shouldn't do that on Shabbat, because what are you going to need? You're going to need flat ground to put the barrel out. So we don't want to worry that you're going to flatten out the ground. Lo lihadik inish or udra bepuma deshisha, dilma ate lidei schita. Okay, you shouldn't put in some material, felt or something like that, in the opening where you have the liquid coming out of the barrel, okay, or in the top of, or a top of a jug, because you might end up, remember, it might get wet and then you'll squeeze it out. Amarav Kahana, teach al gabe big deal. We're now back to dirt that you might have on your clothing. So if you want to clean it on Shabbat, it's a problem of malabe, and you're not allowed to wash off a stain on Shabbat. Or if you get dirt on your shirt, so what do? Generally you can rub it to get the dirt off, but we don't want you to do it on the outside because it'll look like you're washing. So you can rub it from the inside and it'll hopefully fall off on the outside. Meitive, but now we have a source that seems to contradict. Teach al gabe minalo megararo begava sakin. If you have dirt on your shoe, you can take it off with the back of your knife. Now here we don't want to use the front of your knife because we're worried if you use the sharp part of the knife, you'll end up with a separate problem, which is you're doing memachik, you're smoothing out the leather on the shoe. So we allow you to do it with the back of a knife. Vishal big dough, and if it's on your clothing, and this is going to be the issue, megararo b'tzipor, and you could scrape it off with your nail, u'avad shalei kaskes, as long as you don't rub it back and forth. Now my lav shalei kaskes klal, it sounds like you can't rub it at all. You can only take it off with your fingernail. So that would seem to indicate that you can't do it from the inside. So what do they answer? Lo. No, what it means is you can't rub it from the inside. From the outside, you can only rub it from the inside. You can scrape off, using this back of a knife, a new shoe, but not an old shoe. Okay, I kind of said it already, even though it didn't say it yet, but now they're going to say, you can only use the back of a knife. Now, what is the difference between a new shoe and an old shoe? The assumption is the new shoe is already smooth, So if you use the front of the knife, it'll still be a problem of smoothing. But if you use the back of a knife, it won't be. But an old shoe, when you scrape it, even with the back of a knife, it's going to come to be smoothing the leather. And now we have an issue, it's the Isur Milacha that we learned before, of smoothing out the leather. This is in all the Hatzad Tzvi, you hunt the animal, you kill it, you smooth the leather, and then you do ibud. Remember, you process the leather, you tan it. So we're going to get to that in another minute. Amalehu Saba. Sami didech mekame, okay, knock out what you just said, wipe it out. Mekame hadatane Rabbi Chia. In other words, what you just said is not true, because listen to the Braita that Rabbi Chia brought. Ein megararin lo b'minal chadash v'lo minal yashan. Not a new shoe, not an old shoe. V'lo yasuchet raglo shemen v'hu b'toch haminal. And you can't put oil on your leg if you have your shoe on, because that's a separate problem of what I said before, ibud, tanning, processing the leather. If you put oil on your leg and it'll drip down to your shoe, it's a problem. O b'toch sandal. If your foot is in the minal or it's in the sandal, then you can't put on your foot because it's going to get on the shoe. Aval, but what can you do? Sachet raglo shemen u'miniach b'toch minal o b'toch sandal. You can put oil on your leg and then put the shoe on or the sandal on. V'sach kol gufo shemen. Likewise, you could put oil all over your body. U'mitagel al gabei katavliya. You could then lie down on a piece of leather that you want to use to cover your couch or something. Even though it's now going to get oil on it, you're doing it in obviously a clearly atypical manner. That's not how you would normally do it, and you're allowed. So now, again, what did we have here? We started with Rabbi Avau, who said, or even before Rabbi Avau, right, Rabbi Avau said, in the name of Rabbi Yana, Megarim min al chadash avalo yashan, came this Saba who said, no, you can't say that because we have this Braita that says you can't do lo min al chadash v'lo min al yashan. So Amar Rav Chisda, lo shanu ela letzachzecho, aval le'avdo asur. So now, when they talk about this, the tanning and the processing, we're now going to say that even that, okay, and as we started with, Rabbi Avau said this, came this Saba and said, no, we say the opposite. Then, the truth is, maybe, I assume the whole thing was the Braita. Maybe I'm wrong, but no, the whole thing is the Braita. And now we're going to talk about this Braita, and Rav Chisda is going to say about this Braita, he says, what about the second part? He says, by the way, the second part, lo shanu ela letzachzecho, aval la'avdo asur. It's only if you're doing it to shine the leather. But if let's say you want to shine your shoe, you want some oil on it, so that you're allowed to do in this indirect manner, by putting the oil on your body, then putting the shoe on. Aval la'avdo, but if you're doing it to process it, to tan the leather, or undergo some process, then it's asur, la'avdo, asur. So then the Gemara says, la'avdo pshita. Obviously, if you're planning to process the leather, of course it's going to be forbidden even in that manner. That's a malacha deoraita, right? It's forbidden by the Torah law. V'tu, and additionally, how could someone say that if you're doing it to shine, it's allowed? So, ela itmar hachitmar. This is what he said. Amrav Chisda lo shanu ela shiur letzachzecho. In other words, if you want to put your shoe on after you just put oil on your body, you're allowed to do that as long as the amount of oil you have in your body is the shiur letzachzecho, is an amount that theoretically could shine your shoe. Not that you're trying to shine your shoe. You can't shine your shoe on Shabbat in that way. But you could do it if you use the amount of oil that would be needed to shine. Aval shiur la'avdo, but if you put a lot of oil on, it's enough to process that shoe, no, then it's asur. Then even though you're not intending to, it's still forbidden. Tanu Abanan, another Braita. Lo yetze katan b'min al gadol. Now we have other issues. You can't wear a shoe that's way too big on you. If a child takes a grown-up shoe, he can't wear it. This is obviously different from when we talked about the sandalim, where they did a kid wore a grown-up shoe, but then they adjusted it. Here we're talking about not if there's a way to adjust it, because we're worried that he might take it off, right? It'll fall off and he might end up carrying it. It'll be uncomfortable. But if it's the cloak that's too big, he's not going to come to take that off. She can't walk out in torn shoe because she might take it off. People will make fun of her. Notice it's only women we're worried about here. We're not worried about men being made fun of, but the women will become, maybe they're overly sensitive, or maybe people just don't care about the way men look and people care more about the way women look. So they might say, oh, what are you wearing? A ripped shoe? So we're worried she might take it off. And additionally, when it comes to chalitza, If you remember, that's the process where the brother doesn't want to marry the woman whose husband died without children. So he takes off his shoe and she spits into the shoe. You need there a shoe, and it needs to be a good shoe, a solid shoe, not one that's torn at the top. But if you did it anyway, b'diavad, it'll work anyway. You can't go out wearing a new shoe. Why not a new shoe? Because what happens with the new shoe, we all know you could get blisters. You might find out it doesn't really fit you properly. So specifically say, again, it's only an issue for women. We're worried that women will be more sensitive, their feet, and they might take them off. Whereas a man won't really care and he'll wear it anyway. Tani bar kapah. This, by the way, is only if she never wore the shoe before. But if she wore it for an hour before Shabbat, then it's allowed. Then we know she already knows it fits her and it's not a problem. Tanechada. Now we have another issue. The way they would make their shoe, we have this nowadays, there's a shoe, what's the word? A shoe frame, where you put the shoe on the frame. And when they would take the shoe, that's what they would build it on the frame. They would take the shoe off the frame, and that was when you had a shoe. Now, until you take it off the frame, it's not actually a kli. So in this case, you're making the utensil when you take it off the frame, which ends up being a problem potentially of makebe patish. You're basically creating the shoe by doing this. And there's other problems, which is the shoe frame is muktzah. Okay, so how do you take off the shoe without moving the frame? That's also a problem. So Tane bar kapara, Tane chada shumtim min al me'al gabe imus. You're allowed to take a shoe off of this frame. V'tani idach ein shumtim. And another place says you can't take the shoe off the frame. Lo kashya had Rabbi Eliezer had Rabbanan. This is a machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis. What's the machloket? Ditnan. It says in the Mishnah, min al shal gabe imus, Rabbi Eliezer mitaher v'chachamim mitamim. Here we have a Mishnah about Tum and Tara purposes, and Mishnah and Kalim. Again, we're going to compare Shabbat and Muktzah. That if the shoe is on the frame, Rabbi Eliezer says the shoe is adayin tahor. If it becomes impure, nothing happens to it because it's not yet a utensil, because you haven't taken it off yet. It's not finished. It's not a finished product. The rabbis say, no, it's a problem. It can become tameh, which again, what will we say now? If it becomes tameh, then it's a kli, which means you could take it off the imus. If it's not a kli, then you can't take it off. So hani chalera, because then it's muktzah, it's not a kli. So now they say, wait a minute. Hani chalera, the Amar. Rava will be very simple, because he says, now we're going to talk about the issue really becomes the frame itself is muktzah, and how can you move the frame? So Rava says, Davar shemalachto leisur, bein letzorach gufo, bein letzorach mekomo mutar, shapir. According to Rava, who says that, and it's one thing to say the shoe isn't muktzah, but even though the shoe's not muktzah, the frame is muktzah. It's a kli shemalachto leisur. But if you hold that kli shemalachto leisur can be moved for its space, here what do you have? You have the space. You need the space. Now, it's a little bit of a loose definition of the space. Usually it's that you need that area, but here you need the space in order to get the shoe off. So if you say that you can move it, litzorach makomo, it's not a problem. Then that makes sense why it would be mutar shapir. But if you say that you can only move a klishim malachto isser for its own purpose, here you're not moving it for its own purpose, you're moving it because you want to get the shoe off. If that's the case, then you shouldn't be allowed to do it to get the shoe off. So how did the opinion that said, if you hold like chachamim, that it's actually a kli, that means you could take off the shoe, but you still can't move it because you're moving the frame with it. So the answer, very simply, it must be on very loosely, which means you can get the shoe off without actually moving the frame. Titania, okay, so now they say, Titania, how do we know this? Rabbi Yehuda Omer, imaya afoy mutar, because Rabbi Yehuda says if it was loose, it's allowed. Now they say, wait a minute. Tama, right? So Tama de rafoy, halo rafoy lo. But now it sounds like only if it was loose. If it wasn't loose, no. So now they're going to say, Hani chala Abaye. This works well now according to Abaye. Why? Tamar davar shemalachto lisor, letzorach gufo mutar, letzorach makomo asur. Rabbi Yehuda says, basically, only if it's loose is it allowed. That means if it's on tightly, you can't. According to Rabbi Yehuda, this braita is going to create a problem for Rava now. According to Abaye, it makes sense. If it's on loosely, what we say, then you can take it off because you're not actually moving it. But if it's on tightly, it's a problem because you're going to end up moving the frame. If you move the frame, it's a davar shemalachto lisor, and you can't move it l'tzorach makomo. So therefore, Shapir, Ela l'Rava, Damar, bein l'tzorach gufo, bein l'tzorach makomo mutar, but Rava, who says, you're allowed to move it in any case. My area rafoy, afilu lo rafoy nami. You can even move it if it's not loose, right? Because again, according to him, he's explaining the opinion of the rabbis that the shoe is already a utensil, right? It's finished. So you could take it off. If you move it, who cares if you move the frame? So why would it have to be on loosely? So the answer, that braita, he de Rabbi Yehuda, mishum de Rabbi Eliezer. This is Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Eliezer. Detanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer mishum Rabbi Eliezer imayah rafoy mutar. According to this, the issue of rafoy, of loose and tight, is a total different issue. The issue is if it's loose, then it doesn't need anything really for you to take it off. Okay, meaning there's already been gemar malacha. The machloket here, according to this, is that Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, "Maya rafoy mutar," but if it wasn't rafoy, you can't remove it. Why can't you remove it? Because removing it is actually gemar malacha. That's like it's like makeh patish, putting the final blow. So only if it's loose, are you allowed to take it off. And then the focus becomes on the shoe and not the frame, according to this. Okay, and that's why that braita is talking about something else, and therefore it doesn't have to do with our issue. Okay, and therefore isn't a question on Rava, because Rava will still say that he was saying the shoe's not the issue, the issue is the frame. And this issue is talking about specifically the shoe. Hadran al Tolin, and now we're starting this 21st parak. Moving on. Notel adamek benova even biyado. You can carry your son even if he has a rock in his hand. And we're not worried that you're actually carrying the rock, and the rock is muktzah. Okay, we're talking about muktzah issues right now. Right now we're talking about muktzah. We're going to move into carrying. There's always a bit of a blurred lines between the two. But remember, carrying is forbidden by Torah law, muktzah is forbidden by rabbinic law, and there's other differences between them also. But anyway, you can pick up your son even though he has a rock in his hand. You can pick up a basket even though there's a rock inside. You can carry impure truma with pure truma. Now, impure truma has to be burned, so theoretically it's muktzah. There's nothing you can do with it, but you can still carry it with pure truma, meaning it's canceled to that. These are all cases where one thing is significant, the other isn't. You could still carry all of it together. And with regular, if you have truma tmeah, messed up truma mixed in with regular stuff, you can also carry that. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af ma'alina tameduma be'echad u'mea. Okay, we'll get to this in the Gemara, why this is okay. But the background is like this. Truma, if you have truma that got mixed up, it's only for the Kohen and it's sanctified. And it gets mixed up with all your regular produce. If you have 100 times the amount to one time, let's say you have 101 portions, one is truma, 100 are not. It's canceled. Normally we say batel b'shishim, it's canceled in 60. This is canceled with 100. There's different things that need more to cancel them out. Truma is one of them, and the amount is 100. But what happens? So if you have 101, all this is fine. However, since one of those portions was supposed to go to the Kohen, and we don't want the Kohen to have a loss, you basically take out one portion's worth and you give it to a Kohen. That becomes truma, and it has the name truma on it. You basically consider that truma for all intents and purposes. It becomes tameh, you have to burn it. It has all the sanctifications of truma, even though right now there's some truma that was already sanctified that's mixed in here, but that's all canceled, and you make a new truma out of it. Let's say you have those 101 that were mixed together, and it's Shabbat, and you want to eat it, but you haven't yet taken out the one portion. So you can actually take that out on Shabbat, even though normally we don't allow you to do Trumot and Masrot and separate all that stuff on Shabbat, but we do allow you to do this. Okay, we'll see in the Gemara why. So Amar Rava. Rava starts out and says, Hotzi tinok chai, v'kis taloi v'tzavaro chayav. So here the Gemara immediately moves to carrying, right, as opposed to muktzah, which is probably even in your house. Here we're moving now to carrying in a public domain. So let's say you take out a live child, and there's a kiss around his neck. There's a little purse with something in it around his neck. Chayav mishum kis. Okay, the kiss, maybe there's money in it or something that's muktzah, so that you're obligated on Shabbat because of the kiss. Okay, so it's not canceled. Okay, not because of the tinok. You can carry the tinok. We'll see why, but you can't carry the kiss. If the tinok is mate, v'kis taloi v'tzavaro patur. You're patur from everything in this case. Okay, we'll have to see why in a minute. So first, let's start with the first case. Tinok chai v'kis taloi lo v'tzavaro chayav mishum kis. So now the Gemara says, v'li chayav mishum tinok. Why don't you also chayav nami mishum tinok? You should also be obligated for carrying a baby. Rava ke Rabbi Natan svirle. He holds like Rabbi Natan. We've learned this before. Da'amar chai nosei et atzmo. live being carries itself, which means that when you carry it, you're not actually obligated in carrying because you're doing something. So before, one of the explanations is it's like two people are carrying something together because he's helping carry himself. Okay, there's a debate when we say tinok here, do we mean actually infant? Because infants really don't carry themselves, or maybe we mean a bit of an older child. We saw the other day that tinok was used to describe an older child who was doing the planting. Remember the tinok, non-Jewish tinok, who did the planting of the kilayim for the person? So anyway, tinok could mean someone a little bit older. Maybe some people think even a baby is considered chay noseh et atzmo. The libatal kis legabe tinok. Why don't we say that the kis is secondary to the tinok? And where do we know that from? From our Mishnah. Milotnan, doesn't it say in our Mishnah? Et achai b'mita patur palamita shamita tfelalo. Right? What do we say? You can carry the chai in. This is a different Mishnah. Et achai b'mita. You're allowed to carry a live person in a bed. Sorry, this is a different one thing. You're patur even for carrying the bed. The chai you're patur because chai noseh et atzmo. And the bed you're patur because the bed is serving the chai. So the chai, the live person, is the important part. So what do they say? So why in the kis, but the kis is on the baby and you're not obligated for the baby, why don't we say the kis is canceled to the baby just like the mita is canceled to the person? So they say, no, there's a distinction. Mita legabe chai mevatlele. Kis legabe tinok lo mevatlele. A bed for a live person is what's the issue? The bed serves the person. Therefore, it's the person that's at the center. The bed is serving the person. But the kis doesn't really serve the baby. It's there as a toy or something for the baby to play with, to interest him. But it's not really considered serving the baby, in which case we end up with a baby and a kis. So the baby, you're not obligated for, the kis you are. Tinok mate. So now let's go to the next case. Tinok mate, the kis talo lo b'tzaparo patur. So why don't we say you're obligated because of the tinok, right? Just like we just said, right? It's like our case. If you're carrying the kis and the baby, you're obligated. Here it says, right? Sorry, notel adamid beno. Sorry, tinok mate. I'm getting confused for a minute. Okay, go back. Tinok mate, the kis talo lo b'tzaparo patur. The second part was the tinok is dead and the kis is hanging on its neck and you're patur. So they say, l'chai mishum tinok. Why are you exempt from carrying this baby? Theoretically, it's not noseh et atzmo anymore. It's dead. So it should be chayav for carrying a baby. That's not muktzah. It's an isur hotza'ah. You've carried something from the private to the public. That's not allowed. So Rabbi Shimon he holds like Rabbi Shimon. Remember carrying out the dead person? We always use that as our classic example of melach hashen tzricha legufa. Why are you carrying things out in general? Because you need them. When you carry out this baby, you don't need the baby. The dead baby, you need it out of your house, let's say, because of the smell or whatever it is. You're moving it out or to bury it, but that's to bury it, not because you really need it for any positive purpose, even though you might say burial is a positive purpose, but that's not what we're referring to here. And therefore, he holds like Rabbi Shimon who says you're patur, and that's why he says you're patur for doing that, right? Now remember, it says, right? You're patur. Patur could often mean patur balasur. You still can't do it, but you're not obligated midoraita. Now they finally get to our Mishnah. Sorry, I kept confusing it before. Tanan notel adamet benova even biado. Right. So now we have our Mishnah though. Our Mishnah says you can carry the child with the even in his hand. Now, what's the issue here? Before we said the kis is not canceled. Now we're back to the first case where the baby was alive. You carried the baby and the kis, you're obligated on the kis. So why, if you carry this child, do we say that you can carry the child holding a rock in his hand and then you're not obligated for a muktzah? Again, one is carrying outside and one is muktzah, but still, you should be able to learn one from the other. So Amrei Debei Rabbi Yanai b'tinok sheyesh lo gaguim alaviv. Okay, now this has a few different interesting interpretations. It's that the child is very sad. He wants his father to carry him. And that's why you're allowed to carry, right? Rashi says, "Shim lo yitzlenu yichle, v'lo ha'amidu tilto shelo b'yadayim b'mkom sakana." He might get sick, right? This kid really wants his father. There's a good example of, right, how seriously we take our kids when they cry. Really wants his father. That's why we allow the father to carry it, even though there's a rock in its hand. Now, Tosfot on the next stop is going to ask, based on some other suggestion the Gemara makes in a different case, he's going to say, why don't we require you to drop the rock from the hands of the child? So he says something very interesting, which is a nice way to end today. He says, if you look at Tosfot on the next page, the third line, v'yesh lomar im yashlichu miyado yitzak hatinok v'yivkeh. We don't want the child to cry. Right? We all know when a baby's holding something in his hand and you take that out of the baby's hand, the baby goes nuts. So because of that reason, we allow you, it's fascinating, right? Even though theoretically, maybe this would be muktzah, both because of the concern of the child really wants the father to carry him, and he doesn't want to let go of that rock. We allow the father to carry the child, and we view the rock as secondary to the child, even though in the other case, where somebody takes the baby out into public domain with something around its neck, we obligate that adult also for the thing that's around the neck. Okay, but here we allow the parent to do it so that the parent can carry the child when the child needs carrying. Okay, we will end here for today, and we'll pick up on Sunday with the continuation of this sugya.